Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I just wanted to share tonight that kind of as the basis of my story, how my old life was built on shifting sands, and really God had to wipe it away in order to build the life that He's given me now. And so just wanted to share, I grew up in upstate New York, grew up with a great family, and from a young age I was an athlete. I did a lot of team sports, but early on I was taught to be self-resilient and in control as much as possible. And to not show weakness. Those were some of the things that I grew up that were instilled in me. And I went from team sports to distance running because I could have more control over the outcome. There was no umpires, there were no other teammates I had to rely on. So early on, I wanted to find as much control as I could over anything. Like I said, my dad always taught me to appear strong and to just overcome things on my own as much as possible. I do believe I was searching. At a young age, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I was confirmed in the Catholic Church. But early on, after I did start to explore my faith, I went to other churches, but it was always kind of on my to-do list to really explore my faith. But I never prioritized it. It was always kind of there, but again, never made a real effort at it. So my identity as a runner started to shape a lot of the decisions in my life. It was who my friends were, where I was going to go to college. They all hinged on my running and my physical ability, I guess. That and challenge. I liked running and being challenged. So that was all reinforced. I chose to go to West Point for my undergrad, and mainly because there was a big challenge and they recruited me to run. And from day one there, my identity was reinforced. The first day we took a PT test. I scored the highest on it, and the next day I had a general shaking my hand telling me, "You're going to be a good leader because you're fast and you're in shape." And for the next 4 years, we know that's not necessarily true, but for the next 4 years, that's really who I tried to live up to be. Those were the expectations. Those were what people saw of me, the guy out there running. It led me to switch over to race triathlons, and triathlons took me some cool places. I was a 3-time All-American, got to race all over the country, but that was kind of the life I built and for myself. And I think faith, again, was still there in the back of my mind, but never really went to church at West Point. So what happened? My senior year, a guy named Austin Wilson shared Galatians 2:20 with me. Does anyone know Galatians 2:20? Want to quote it? Let's hear it, David.
"I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life when I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me."
Thanks, David. So hearing those words as a senior in college, it was pretty impressive. I had never seen anyone quote the Bible before. Naturally, I thought he knew the whole Bible because he shared that verse. But this guy was also really, he was a great athlete as well. So I looked up to him in that sense, and he was one of my instructors at the time. And so I agreed to go out to a Bible study called The Navigators because, again, I looked up to him as a person and because he quoted the Bible. And I really didn't know the Bible. I thought I did growing up going to church, but I had never read it, and no one really had ever mentioned to me the idea of reading it for myself. So I had multiple opportunities over my senior year to, I guess, truly respond to that message that Austin shared with me, but again, I didn't really see where it fit into my life. I was training 4 hours a day, taking 25 credits academically, and was pretty busy. At the time, my personal goals were still the biggest thing in my life. Winning races, doing these different physical challenges. And they weren't necessarily bad things, but they kept me from diving deeper in my faith or getting close enough for someone else to speak into my life. So going back to the analogy that Alex shared from the gospel, the storm started 2 days after graduation. I was hit by a car, I fractured my femur, and I was unable to move for the next 2 months. So brand new Army lieutenant, going from top of the class physically to on crutches, showing up to my first duty station. And, I still, found the silver lining in it, rehabbed, and tried to make it through on my own. But I was increasingly motivated by fear and anxiety, and I was really kind of afraid of losing the life I had. So I left from New York, where I was on leave, to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is, if anyone's been there, kind of the middle of nowhere. And but kind of put the blinders on, got healthy enough to get back to my plan of being an Army officer and racing triathlons. That was the beginning of the storm, but it continued. 2 months later, I began to have GI problems, and just like Ryan said, as much as I share my faith, I also share my physical challenges. And it was around that time I started pooping out blood up to 20, 30 times a day. And I was basically seeing my physical body deteriorate without any explanation, and I was pretty scared. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune inflammatory bowel disease. And the words of the doctor that diagnosed me was, there's no known cause, there's no known cure, and it's completely unpredictable. Good luck. I was diagnosed off base. It was a long story, but bottom line, it was disqualifying by the Army medical standards. But because I was diagnosed off base, I was able to hide it. And so I kind of went into this self-preservation mode of hiding the challenges I was facing, like I was taught to do with everything else up to that point. I went into denial, got healthy enough to get back into this dive school program I was doing, and did my best to hide it. It was during that training that they saw my records eventually, and I wasn't able to continue the route where I was supposed to go to Panama City Beach, train where the Navy sends their divers down to their salvage dive school, and then move to Hawaii for my duty station. But based on my lack of physical ability at the time, being sick, they actually sent me out to Fort Lewis, Washington. Again, it wasn't my plan to go there. And at the time, I was in another flare-up, the second flare-up of. It kind of comes and goes for me, but anyway. So at that point, I was pretty weak. I lost kind of everything. I wasn't a diver, I wasn't an athlete, and I was kind of just miserable. I got on the road from Missouri to Washington in February, and it was pretty cold, and it was, again, pretty miserable. I was wearing diapers, I was unable to eat, and I was pretty much alone. And on the drive, I actually stayed with a friend that's at BYU, and they're Mormon, and I saw that these guys had like a joy that I didn't have, and it was kind of because they had faith. And it was really interesting to me because it made me check. I was like, am I a Christian? I thought I was. I think that's who I was raised to be. But I realized that I definitely wasn't living it out, and it didn't mean anything to me. Yet these guys, there was like 8 guys crammed into like a 3-bedroom house. They were just having the time of their life because they were connected over their faith. It made me think, God, who are you? And so the next day, I was on the road in Utah and had another episode, pulled over, and I just remember the sight and just praying, God, I can't do this on my own. I need your help. I don't really know you, but I want you in my life. Please help me. And I prayed before, but this was a different prayer. This was truly surrendering to God. And I wish I could say the heavens parted and all that, but pretty cool that God answered that prayer, and I wanted to share a little bit about that. God started with the circumstances in my life, but then He used people. He answered my prayer through people, and it came through a guy named Zach Abrams. The week I prayed that prayer, I was supposed to go to one Army base on post. The week I prayed that prayer, I got called and said, hey, you're going over here. So that means your new boss is going to change, everything's going to change. I was like, all right. Showed up, this guy named Zach, from day one was living for the Lord, and I could see something different. But Zach was involved with a group called the Navigators, and he, within a 20-minute car ride, he was able to share the gospel with me, similar to the way Austin Wilson had shared about a year and a half prior. And it was through that I agreed to come out to a Bible study because I had nothing else to lose at that point. It was during that time that I started. I still wasn't reading the Bible for myself, like daily, but I was doing a weekly Bible study, and that was more than I'd ever done. And the studies revolved around the characteristics of Jesus. And so each week I would read something about and do a study on Jesus the teacher. And then I would see Zach, my boss, as well as the guy who was really pouring into me. He would get up and teach in front of a group. And then it would be Jesus the servant. And I would see Zach serving others, taking them to the airport, helping them move. And I continued to see that. I continued to see Jesus in the lives of other people in that community. And it really challenged me, and it really was the first time I had seen it. But what really kept me around were the game nights early on. I did go to Bible study weekly, but it was the weekend game nights were the main reason I would say I kept hanging around. It was fun. I enjoyed not having to just go out on Saturday nights with all the other lieutenants and drinking because I was too sick, but having a place where it could actually bond and be together. So I definitely value that, and God used that to keep me around long enough to reveal himself to me. So also a guy named Ross, I was racing triathlons. He went out of his way to spend time with me, do what I wanted to do. He went to the pool with me. He ran with me, even though he didn't necessarily want to. He was getting ready to do something, go to Green Beret training, but he took the time, even though we only knew each other a month, to do those things with me, and I'll never forget that. So next, I just want to share how God used the Word in my life to really convict me to give my life to him. So it was 6 months after I met the Navigators that I ended up in the hospital in a really severe flare. I was at the point where my resting heart rate was 120. I had lost so much blood. They wanted to do emergency surgery to remove my colon. They almost had to, and they had to give me a blood transfusion because I just let it get to the point. I didn't know any better, but I let it get pretty bad. It was at that point where I was completely broken. My old identity kind of crept back in at Fort Lewis. And that's where, at that point, I knew the med board was going to start on me, since the Army knew about it at that point. And talk about the house that was on Shifting Sands, that's kind of when it collapsed. It was at the point where everything I had done to that point in my life was, it was pretty much in question or gone. And so, in the hospital, I prayed my second prayer, and it was, God, I can see that you've answered my prayer. I don't know what this means, but I give you my whole life. Again, I didn't know what that meant, but a week later, God gave me the opportunity to respond. And so I was in a lease that had about 6 more months with some friends from West Point, but it was at that point that Zach and his roommate Tom asked me to move in with them. And he said, we'd like for you to move in and to just kind of see how we live life. Basically, Zach was saying what 1 Corinthians 11:1 says, where Paul says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. And I saw Zach and Tom wake up on a mission every day to follow Jesus. But I say this as a kingdom decision because I could have stayed in that other lease. It didn't make sense to take on a second rent, to move away farther from base with less comfort and all that. The house I had like a big screen TV. It was awesome. But in this house, didn't have a TV and didn't have anything other than these two awesome guys. So, but I knew God was calling me to do it. So that was the first step of faith. Okay, God, I'm moving in. I'll start paying second rent. And the first thing Zach did for me was he woke me up at 5 a.m. to read the Bible. And I had started to read the Bible, like I said, but hadn't been consistent. And I remember that first morning very clearly. I remember seeing the dust on the shades and being like, I got to dust those shades. I can't, I just remember being so, I don't think the devil was afraid of me knowing about Jesus. He was afraid of me knowing Jesus. And the way I got to know him was through his word daily. And Zach helped guide me through that. We would spend about 20 minutes reading the Bible separately, and then we'd come together and share, what the Lord was teaching us each day. And it was around that time that I started thinking, can I be like this too? The way Zach and Tom are. They wake up with a heart for people every day, and they live out John 13:34-35, where it says, love one another. And I got to see them do that. Second area was purity. These guys, challenged me in the area of purity. And it wasn't something that I understood at the time of why that was important. And I committed to it, without knowing why it was important, and God showed me later why. And so it was a few months later that I met a guy named Andrew Stroud. I was coming down here just to visit family, and they said, the guys at Fort Lewis said, hey, you should meet this guy named Andrew. He runs a home church or something down in San Diego. You should stop by. So I went to home church, but the next day Andrew got time with me, and we had coffee, and I think he assumed I was laboring and doing stuff to reach out to people in my faith, but realistically I wasn't yet. I was really just doing the basics of trying to follow Jesus, not knowing exactly why I was doing them. But Andrew helped me connect the dots. He shared a verse, 2 Timothy 2:21, which says, therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. And so it's that idea that I could be useful to the master that no one had really said yet. And Andrew helped me see that that obedience went beyond just my daily quiet time, but in the way I lived and the way other people saw. And so he inspired me to become useful, both by cleansing myself from other things, but also to learn how to share my faith. So I ended up back in the hospital in December, and I was worse in August, according to all my blood markers, but things were different now. And that's where I really think my identity was different. I was no longer crushed, even though my hematocrit, my CBC, everything was still worse. I was in there for 7 days, but I had over 40 visitors from the Navigator stop by, and my spiritual family didn't care that I was sick. Unlike all my other friends, Army friends, triathletes, our relationship was based on if I was healthy. These people didn't care, which was pretty cool, and I think that's how God sees me too. Philippians 4:11 says, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And so through 8 different hospitalizations and other challenges along the way, I cling to that promise that Paul learned in whatever situation to be content, and I strive to do the same thing. So it really taught me that my physical state doesn't define me. Instead, boasting in my weakness only highlights God's glory that much more. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, so we do not lose hope. Though our outer selves are wasting away, our inner selves are being renewed day by day. And I believe that's true. So I just want to close with, right after that hospitalization, I went home. And that's when I realized that I was different. Because being around a group of believers is like, okay, like I'm living like them. But going home was different. So I just want to read this real quick. This is a journal entry I have from December 2014. It was around that time that I realized that God wanted others to have the same peace I was experiencing, the peace that only Jesus offers. I went home to New York in December for the holidays, and 2 Corinthians 5:17, which says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone away. Behold, the new has come. Finally made sense. I knew my life had changed, but now people saw it. People started seeing Christ in me the way I had seen it in Zach. In Luke 10, Jesus sends out the 72, and this is exactly how I felt leaving our community for the first time with this new hope. Jesus asked his followers to act on the teachings he had been sharing, and in the same way I went home to live out the word and apply what I had read and observed. While at home, I should have been sick, tired, anemic, resting, but the fire inside of me gave me this new energy I can't really describe, to love God and to love people. I ended up sharing the wheel, the only illustration of the gospel I knew, with 20 people in those 3 weeks. I saw the word of God make a grown man next to me on the plane ride home break down in tears. It changed my relationship with my dad. It allowed me to meet new people and form new bonds through the love of Jesus in a way that I had never experienced before. So since then, it's been 4 years, but I like to believe that flame hasn't gone out. That same passion that he put in me. And so just some things. I wish I could share everything that's happened in the 4 years since then. Somehow I ended up here in San Diego. But the biggest lesson was, stop planning and just be obedient and listen. And Isaiah 55:8-9 highlights that, where God's plans are bigger than our plans. And God's continued to show that that's true to me. He also has shown me that the only true foundation is Jesus, just like the story about the house. 1 Corinthians 3:11 says, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which has been laid, which is Jesus Christ. So at this point, I'm probably like a toddler Christian, old enough where I have some responsibility. I'm not just being spoon-fed by my father, but I am truly still relying on him for everything. And my daily prayer, similar to that first prayer, is, God, I can't do this on my own, but even if I could, I wouldn't want to. I want your plan for my life. Help me live for you. And so just some practical ways I'm doing that now. I've lived in community with other believers for the past 4 years. Right now with Alex and a guy named Torin as well. And I spend time with the Lord every morning before school, which is when my GI symptoms are the worst, and that's when it reminds me the most that I need my Father. Also, we do lead a Bible study on 32nd Street. That's been an awesome journey, Miracle on 32nd Street. And it's small beginnings, but we're being faithful. And we also are part of a home church that meets in Chula Vista. So one weakness that God has shown me, just as he's still teaching me, is that I do prioritize group events and reaching out to new people sometimes instead of meeting and following up with young believers. So God's continued to shape me, and I think that's one area. If I truly want to do what Zach Abrams did for me, then he prioritized meeting with me more than pretty much anything else, and just as Jesus did with the 12. So I need to pray for opportunities and prioritize one-on-one time with individuals. I'm in the second year of medical school. My main mission field is still the Navy, but I do strive to share the love of Jesus with my classmates and with all my future patients. And I'll just leave you with kind of the verse that is the number one verse I claim is Matthew 6:33. It says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." So that's it. Any questions for me? No? Okay, well, I have one question for you guys. Actually, two. But, similar to my story, is there anything in your life that you're making too big, that's getting in the way of you hearing from God? And just something to consider. And have you asked for God's help? Have you admitted that you need his help? It wasn't until I did that God reached me. So I just encourage you to do the same. Just admit that you need his help. And also, who is your Zach? Who is investing in you? And if there isn't anyone right now, I would just pray for someone, because God used a person to change my life. And similarly, who in your life can you share Jesus with? So those just some of the things to take away, hopefully, just to encourage you as we all continue to try to advance, the mission of Jesus here in San Diego. That's all I got.